The Smith family had always felt safe in their quiet suburban neighborhood. They'd installed a Ring camera mostly for package deliveries and the occasional raccoon on the porch, never imagining it would capture anything unusual. But one Tuesday night, around 2:30 a.m., Mrs. Smith's phone buzzed with a motion alert. Half asleep, she opened the app, expecting to see a passing car or maybe the neighbor's cat. Instead, the footage showed a man standing motionless at the very edge of the porch light, just far enough that his face was swallowed in shadow. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't even shift his weight. He simply stood there, staring into the camera, as if he knew she was watching. The figure stayed for several minutes before walking out of frame. The police were called, but when they arrived, the street was empty and there were no signs of forced entry. They suggested it was just a prankster and told the Smiths to keep their doors locked. But the next night, at the same time, the motion alert went off again. This time, there were 3 figures. All of them stood silently in the same spot, their faces obscured, bodies unnaturally still. The creepiest part was the way their heads tilted in perfect unison toward the camera, almost like they were listening. By the 3rd night, the Smiths were too terrified to sleep. They sat in the living room with the feed pulled up on their TV, waiting. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the camera activated. The porch was empty for a heartbeat, and then, in a sudden glitch of static, a woman appeared directly in front of the lens. Her face was blurred, hair hanging in wet strands, but her eyes glowed pale against the dark. She leaned so close that her breath fogged the screen, and in a voice that somehow bled through the speaker, she whispered, "Can you see me?" Mrs. Smith screamed, and the image cut to black. When it returned, the porch was empty again. That was the moment the Smiths realized this wasn't a prank. It wasn't something human at all. And whatever it was, it knew exactly where they lived. The following evening, the Smiths gathered in their living room, afraid to sleep but too exhausted to keep watch in silence. The kids were restless, their young minds not fully understanding why their parents jumped at every sound. Mr. Smith set his phone on the coffee table, the Ring app open in case the camera picked up movement again. Midnight passed quietly. 1 a.m. came and went. By 2:30 a.m., everyone's nerves were stretched thin, every creak of the house making them flinch. At 2:41, the notification came. The phone buzzed against the wooden table, and every head turned toward it. Mr. Smith unlocked the screen with shaking hands. The feed showed the porch again. At first, there was nothing. The porch light flickered once, dimmed, then returned to normal. And then a figure slowly leaned into frame from the left side, as though it had been standing just out of sight, waiting. It was the same long-haired woman, her face still obscured, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood more figures, their outlines barely visible in the dark. Their bodies twitched with a strange, stuttering motion, like frames skipping in a corrupted video. They didn't move closer, but the camera seemed to struggle to process them, the image pixelating, warping, almost as if the devices themselves were resisting their presence. Suddenly, the audio crackled to life. The Smiths hadn't turned on the two-way talk feature, but still, a low chorus of whispers bled through the phone speaker. Different voices, layered and distorted, but all saying the same thing, "We see you." Mrs. Smith clutched her children close while Mr. Smith grabbed a baseball bat from the corner. His hands were trembling, but he forced himself to step toward the door. He swung it open with a shout, only to find the porch empty. No woman. No crowd. Just the faint hum of the streetlight buzzing above. When he looked back at the phone, the feed was still running, still showing the figures. They were standing there on the screen, right where the camera was pointing, even though the porch itself was empty. And in that moment, the Smiths understood with a sickening certainty, the camera wasn't just recording anymore. It was showing something that was really there, something they couldn't see with their own eyes. By the 4th night, the entire neighborhood was on edge. Porch lights stayed on, blinds were drawn tight, and every family kept their phones close, waiting for the inevitable motion alerts. People weren't just scared anymore, they were desperate. The Smiths invited a few neighbors over, including the Johnsons and the Millers, to compare Ring footage on a laptop in their kitchen. What they discovered sent a shiver through everyone in the room. The clips lined up almost perfectly. At 2:17 a.m., the Johnsons' backyard figure appeared. At 2:41, the Smiths had the three figures at their door. At 2:46, the Millers' audio picked up heavy breathing again. Different houses, different angles, but the timestamps overlapped like clockwork. Whatever was stalking them wasn't random. It was organized. It moved from house to house in a sequence, like a patrol. But then came the detail no one wanted to admit. As they watched each video side by side, they noticed the same thing lurking in the background of every clip. Behind the masked man on the Smith's porch, in the grainy static of the Miller's audio recording, and crouched low in the shadows of the Johnsons' backyard, there was always a fourth figure. Tall, hunched, with glowing white eyes that never blinked. It never came forward, never revealed itself fully, but it was always there. Watching. The neighbors argued about what to do next. Some wanted to call the police again, but others pointed out that the authorities had already brushed them off. One of the Johnsons suggested setting up extra cameras, even drones, to catch the figures in the act. But Mrs. Smith shook her head. "They want us to see them," she said quietly. "That's the whole point. The more cameras we set up, the closer they'll come." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, no one had a rebuttal. That night, the Smiths decided to test something. They turned off the Ring camera completely. No alerts, no recordings, nothing. For the first time in days, their porch was blind. They hoped that if the figures wanted to be seen, then ignoring them might drive them away. The family sat together in the living room, holding hands, listening to the silence. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. passed. Nothing. For a while, it felt like it had worked. Then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., the children's voices called out from upstairs. Not screams, not cries, just calm, casual conversation. "Mom, Dad, come look at this," the daughter's voice echoed. "We found something outside." But both kids were asleep on the couch between them. Mrs. Smith clapped a hand over her mouth as her husband stood slowly, gripping the bat so hard his knuckles turned white. The voices continued upstairs, mimicking the children's speech, growing louder, clearer. "Come look. Come look. Come look." Terrified, Mr. Smith turned the Ring camera back on, desperate to see anything that could explain it. The feed clicked alive, and what he saw nearly made him drop his phone. The porch was full. Not three figures this time, not four, but an entire crowd, at least a dozen masked and distorted shapes, standing shoulder to shoulder, filling every inch of space. Some wore masks, some looked like neighbors twisted into wrong versions of themselves, and in the center stood the long-haired woman, her head twitching in jagged, unnatural movements. They didn't knock, didn't scratch. They just stood there, whispering in unison, a chorus of voices that filled the night. "Can you see us now?" Suddenly, every Ring camera in the neighborhood went off at once. Phones buzzed and chimed, the group chat exploding with panicked messages. People posted screenshots of their feeds, and the images were horrifyingly consistent, every porch, every driveway, every yard filled with figures. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all staring directly into the cameras as if the entire street had been marked. The Smiths shut the app and turned off the phone, but the voices didn't stop. They were no longer confined to the devices. They were inside the walls, the whispers bleeding through vents and floorboards, closer than ever. By the fifth night, the neighborhood had crossed a line from fear into full-blown panic. Families barricaded doors with furniture, taped black garbage bags over windows, and unplugged every camera they owned, convinced that the things outside were using the devices as some kind of invitation. A few residents even left town altogether, fleeing in the middle of the night with their cars packed, headlights off. But for the ones who stayed, like the Smiths, the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. It wasn't just the cameras anymore. It was everywhere. Mr. Smith met with a small group of neighbors in his garage, the air thick with dread and the smell of sweat. There was Greg Johnson with a crowbar, Marisol Ramirez clutching a kitchen knife, and old Mr. Miller holding a shotgun that trembled in his hands. They had decided that if these things wanted to be seen, then they'd give them a show. They'd go outside, together, and confront whatever was lurking on their porches before it came inside. It was reckless and probably useless, but nobody could stand sitting in silence anymore. They waited until 2:15 a.m., the time the alerts always began, before stepping out. The night was unnaturally still. No crickets, no distant cars, not even a breeze. The entire street lay under a heavy, suffocating hush. Then, at 2:18, the first whisper rose. Faint at first, like wine through dead leaves. Then louder. "Can you see us now?" It came from everywhere at once, from porches, from trees, from the shadows between houses. They flicked on their flashlights. Beams cut through the darkness but found nothing. The street looked empty, yet the whispers kept coming, closer now, weaving between their feet. Greg Johnson raised his crowbar and shouted, "We're not scared of you." His voice cracked at the end, betraying him. The whispering stopped. For a few horrible seconds, there was only silence. Then, the entire street's Ring cameras came on by themselves, even the ones that had been unplugged. Every doorbell chimed at once, a mechanical chorus ringing in the dark. On the Smith's phone screen, the feed flickered to life. The crowd was back. But now they weren't just standing on the porch, they were everywhere. The masked figures lined both sides of the street, stretching as far as the cameras could see. Some were crouched low, their limbs twisted at impossible angles. Others were perched on rooftops like gargoyles, staring down with unblinking eyes. And in the center of it all, the tall faceless one loomed, its white eyes glowing like burning coals. Marisol screamed. She saw them too, only not through a screen. In the beams of their flashlights, shapes began to materialize one by one, stepping out of thin air as if walking out of a photograph. The figures were no longer confined to grainy footage. They were real now, solid, standing just feet away. The long-haired woman tilted her head in that jerky, puppet-like way and raised a hand to point directly at the group. The whisper became a roar, dozens of voices speaking as one, "We're already inside." Panic exploded. Greg swung his crowbar wildly at one of the shapes, but it passed straight through like smoke. Mr. Miller fired his shotgun, the blast echoing down the street. But the pellets dissolved into nothing before reaching the target. In the flash of the muzzle, they saw something even worse, their own faces reflected back at them in the figures, pale and distorted, as if the things had copied them. They bolted back toward the Smith's house, but the front door slammed shut on its own, the deadbolt clicking from the inside. Mrs. Smith screamed from within, pounding on the window as her husband rammed his shoulder into the door. Behind her, shapes began to emerge in the living room shadows, blurry outlines peeling themselves off the walls, stretching, solidifying. The whispers now filled the house, a deafening chant, "You see us. We see you. We're already inside." For the first time since this began, Mr. Smith felt a new, crushing certainty, these weren't people. They weren't pranksters, stalkers, or intruders. Whatever they were, they had been waiting for this moment, and the cameras had been their doorway. That sixth night felt like the end of the world. The entire street was swallowed in an eerie glow, like moonlight mixed with static, flickering as if someone was changing channels on reality itself. The Smiths' living room was no longer a living room, it had become something warped, the walls stretching and pulsing like a heartbeat, the furniture flickering between solid and transparent. The children clutched each other in the corner, their eyes wide, as shapes crawled out of the walls like shadows peeling off paper. Mr. Smith grabbed his wife and kids and tried to run for the back door, but it was gone. In its place stood a black void shimmering with faint white outlines, like the static screen of an old TV. Through it, they could see the porch, but it wasn't their porch anymore. It was an endless street lined with front doors and Ring cameras, stretching on forever, each one showing a different version of their home. Every screen glitched and warped, but one thing was the same in every frame: the crowd of figures, multiplied thousands of times over, standing perfectly still. The whispers rose again, no longer faint but clear and deafening, like a stadium full of voices speaking directly into their skulls. "You invited us. You watched. You let us in." The faceless one stepped through the void, its glowing white eyes brighter now, its height filling the ceiling. The other figures followed, spilling into the house like smoke, their shapes flickering between neighbors, strangers, and monstrous distortions of the Smith family themselves. The long-haired woman crawled forward on all fours, her mouth stretching impossibly wide as she hissed, "We're part of the feed now." The Ring camera on the front porch clicked on by itself. Even though the Smiths had smashed their phones, the footage still appeared, projected on the walls of the living room like 1,000 overlapping screens. Every angle of the house was shown at once: the kitchen, the hallway, the bedrooms. And in every shot, the figures were already there, standing behind them, whispering in their ears. Desperate, Mr. Smith grabbed the only thing left, a hammer, and swung at the camera mounted above the front door. The moment the lens shattered, everything flickered. The whispers turned into a shriek, high-pitched and digital, like a modem connecting. The figures began to dissolve into static, their outlines breaking apart pixel by pixel. The faceless one reached out, its long fingers brushing his shoulder, but then it too began to glitch, fragments of its body falling away like ash. The house snapped back. Walls solidified. Furniture returned. The void was gone. For a moment, it was silent. The Smiths stood frozen in the middle of their living room, trembling, clutching each other, the broken camera sparking faintly on the floor. Outside, the street was empty again, no figures, no whispers, just the quiet hum of the streetlight. But when Mrs. Smith picked up her phone from the floor, the screen was on. The Ring app had opened by itself. It showed a live feed, not of their porch, but of their living room. Them, standing exactly where they were, staring at the screen. And behind them, in the grainy night vision, a single shape lingered. The long-haired woman, crouched low in the corner, whispering silently into the lens. That was the last recorded footage from the Smiths' home. The next morning, their house stood empty. No signs of struggle, no sign of the family. The neighbors who had fled town stopped answering their phones. And across the country, clips started surfacing on social media, doorbell cameras from other states, other neighborhoods, showing the same figure standing still at 2:41 a.m., staring into the lens. No one knows where the Smiths went. No one knows what those things are. But if you scroll through enough Ring footage online, at just the right time of night, you might catch a glimpse of them too. And if you do, don't stare too long, don't listen to the whispers, and for God's sake, don't answer when they ask if you can see them.